How to close in-progress returns. In this video, we're going to talk about what to do when a client leaves the tax site during any stage of the tax preparation process. In other words, you will learn how to close a tax return that is not ready to be submitted to the IRS. Clients may leave our tax centers for a variety of reasons prior to completing the tax return. In these cases, it's important we know the proper closing procedures so that when the client returns, we know exactly how to help them. I'll give you some information first, and then we'll walk through some scenarios. We recommend that you first view the How to Close a Return for Preparers video or How to Close a Return for a Quality Reviewer video before continuing with this training. When a client leaves before finishing the tax return, we must always return all the tax documents to the client, including the intake sheet. We never keep any of their documentation. We will only keep the empty processing envelope for our records. Let's say a client left before any of their information was entered in TaxSlayer. What should we do? Provide the client a green return visit slip, which can be found at the tax site. On the return visit slip, check the first box and write in any relevant information. Since none of the taxpayer's information was entered in the software, no other action is required. The return visit slip must be given to the client along with instructions to return to the office with their large client envelope once they have the missing documents. Let the client know that when they return, they must sign in and show the return visit slip to the intake coordinator. If the tax return has been started in TaxSlayer, but the taxpayer had to leave before the quality review had been finished, and since we can't determine if the information in the tax return is correct, then we need to provide the client with a return visit slip. Check off either the second or third box on the slip. The selection you make is based on where you have stopped in the preparation process. On the processing envelope, complete all fields in the In Progress section. Leave a note in TaxSlayer explaining that the client has left, that a quality review has not been completed, and list any of the documents the client will be returning with. Give the return visit slip to the client along with instructions to return to the office once they are ready or have all of their missing items. Let the client know that when they return to sign in, to show the green return visit slip to the intake coordinator. And finally, set the status in TaxSlayer to In Progress. The In Progress status in TaxSlayer is reserved for all tax returns that have not had a quality review completed. TaxSlayer will place all tax returns as an In Progress status until the Ready for Review box has been checked on the submission page. This is an important feature that notifies staff that the tax return is not ready to be sent to the IRS. If you have selected the Ready for Review button before the quality review has been completed, there is no need to worry. Return to the submission page and uncheck the Ready for Review box. Then save and exit the tax return. This step will return the status of the tax return to In Progress, so the tax return does not get accidentally submitted to the IRS. Now let's say I just finished quality reviewing and have verified the accuracy of the tax return, but my client needs to leave prior to printing. As a quality reviewer, how should I mark the status in TaxSlayer? I shouldn't set the status of TaxSlayer to In Progress. After all tax returns with the In Progress status means that the tax return has not been quality reviewed. I can't set the tax return to Complete status either, since I wasn't able to collect the documentation required to electronically file or mail a tax return. So what should I do? For tax returns where the quality review has been completed but will not be getting submitted to the IRS, we need to set the status of the return to Paper in TaxSlayer. You should provide a client a return visit slip with the last box checked if you anticipate returning with bank information. Fill out all of the fields in the Paper section of the processing envelope. Leave a TaxSlayer note explaining that the client has left, but the quality review has been completed. You can set the TaxSlayer status to paper by navigating to the e-files section of a return. In this section, please select one of the paper options in the Federal Return Type drop-down menu. Once you save your changes, you will land on the submission page. In this page, check the Is Complete box and approve the tax return. After you save and exit the tax return, the status will now show as paper. So why paper status? We set the TaxSlayer status and the processing envelope to paper status because it lets us know that the tax return has been quality reviewed, and so we won't accidentally submit the tax return to the IRS. This way, when the client returns and we see the paper status, we know that the quality review has been completed and it is ready to be submitted to the IRS. Having the correct status listed in TaxSlayer is extremely important to ensure that we are submitting all returns to the IRS that we're supposed to, and that we don't accidentally submit any tax returns to the IRS that were not intended to be submitted. For example, if a tax return that has not been quality reviewed was listed as a paper status, then we can unknowingly distribute a copy of the tax return for the client to mail to the IRS prior to having its final quality check. Or what if the quality review has been completed, but the client did not bring their bank account information? If the tax return was listed as complete status, then we may have accidentally e-filed the tax return without the direct deposit information, causing a delay in the refund for our client. We will now use examples of various situations to discuss the return visit slip in more detail. In our first scenario, you are working at the intake station and interviewing a client. You notice the client is missing a copy of their Social Security card, and we will not be able to complete the tax preparation. What are the appropriate steps to take? At this point, give them the return visit slip as a reminder of what they need to bring back when they do return to the site. There is nothing we need to do in TaxSlayer because the tax return has not yet been started. In the second scenario, while preparing the tax return in TaxSlayer, we realize the tax center is due to close in 10 minutes, and the preparation is taking much longer than we initially anticipated. You still have to add a few more components before signing up to have a quality review done on the tax return. What will you do? Use your final few minutes to properly close the tax return. You will need to provide the client a return visit slip with the second option selected. Fill out the In Progress section of the processing envelope. Leave a note in TaxSlayer. In the software, the status of the tax return will automatically read In Progress. For the third scenario, you are quality reviewing a tax return. When halfway through, you are told by the client that they need to go pick up their child from school and must leave immediately. Rushing a quality review is not in the client's best interest, so what steps should you take? It's best to have the client return at their earliest convenience, but before they leave, provide the client a return visit slip with the third option selected. Fill out the In Progress section of the processing envelope. Leave a note in TaxSlayer. Uncheck the Ready for Review box to return the status to In Progress. Save and exit the tax return. This will set the status of the tax return back to In Progress. For the final scenario, you are a quality reviewer who just finished reviewing the tax information. You have determined the client will be receiving a refund of $300. Since direct depositing is the fastest method in receiving a refund, the client prefers to return on another day with their bank account information. So what do you do next? Since the quality review has been completed, but the return is not ready to be submitted to the IRS, provide the client with a return visit slip. Fill out the paper section of the processing envelope. Leave a note in TaxSlayer. Set the TaxSlayer status to paper. In summary, Any tax return that has not been quality reviewed completely should have the in progress status to prevent the tax return from being submitted to the IRS accidentally. Remember that when giving the client a return slip, let the client know that when they return, they must have the large client envelope and any missing documentation listed on the return visit slip in order to be served. On their return visit, they must sign in, must show the return visit slip to the client liaison, and at that time, they will be placed in the appropriate order in line.